authorized FSP and credit provider. Well, 27 minutes now to 9 the time. At the moment, both here and around the world, we're still seeing a relatively high number of people testing positive for the COVID-19 virus. And while it seems our hospitals are not seeing a large number of people needing treatment, there is plenty of evidence that the world still has to deal with a massive pandemic. There are huge consequences to this in many ways. For example, you may want to start to try and plan for the future for your healthcare system, or to give our nurses and doctors some time off to recover. But we can't do that if we still have many people testing positive for a disease which has killed so many people. At the same time, it seems that this wave, the fifth wave of the virus, is not being driven by a new variant, but by something else, and that in itself may be important. So then, what is happening? Why is it happening? Our guest this morning is Professor Salim Abdool Karim, as you know, Director of the Center for the AIDS Program of Research in South Africa, CAPRISA. He is, of course, the epidemiologist. Professor Abdool Karim, good morning to you, and thank you once again for your time.
Very good morning, Stephen. Good morning to all of the listeners.
Firstly, why are we seeing new cases of COVID-19, the fifth wave, without a new variant?
That is a very good question. So we had always understood that this virus was mutating at a low rate, but that what was happening was that every now and then a different form of the virus with multiple mutations would emerge, and we call that a new variant. Now, we thought that the new variant was needed because when you get infected with one of the existing variants, you develop good immunity against it. But what's happening now, for the first time, we are not seeing a new variant, but we are seeing a subvariant of Omicron. So we've already had a major wave of Omicron BA.1. So that started in December last year. By mid-January, when we opened schools, we saw a second wave of Omicron but caused by a different version called BA.2. And that caused a little uptick. We didn't really feel it too much because we already had BA.1 transmitting. But now we are about 3 months since BA.1 and BA.2, so we have waning immunity. So our antibodies against BA.1 and BA.2 are now at a low level. And so two new subvariants, BA.4 and BA.5, have now emerged. And they are substantially different from BA.2. They come from BA.2. They are derived from BA.2, but they are so different that the body is seeing it like a new variant. And so the body is not responding to it with the memory of the past in the same way that we would expect. And so what's happening is that we're now getting this new wave of infections with BA.4 and BA.5 almost acting like new variants. The significance of this is quite important because it means that basically SARS-CoV-2 is indicating to us that it doesn't need a completely new variant to cause infections and to cause new waves. It can do so also with subvariants of existing variants. So now we got to worry about two things. We got to worry about completely new variants, and we got to worry about existing variants shifting and creating sufficiently different subforms of it.
Okay, so these subforms of it don't seem to be, from what I can see, as, I don't know, is the right word dangerous as a new variant?
So it depends on three things. The first is that the virus itself, Omicron and all of its subvariants, is less severe. And it's less severe because it's not as efficient in infecting the cells of the lungs. It's much more efficient in infecting the cells of the nose. So it's much, much more infectious. But when somebody gets infected, it doesn't go down into the lungs as often as the previous variants. But the second factor is that we now have about half of our adult population that has been vaccinated. So vaccination really mitigates the impact of Omicron as it does with other variants. Now, Omicron is able to escape some of that immunity, but the vaccine still holds firm to a lesser extent. And then thirdly, we've got people who have had past infection. And so past infection, especially if they've had a vaccine as well, that also helps in mitigating the severe effects of Omicron. So those three things combined means that this current wave of BA4 and BA5 is unlikely to lead to a high number of deaths. It is increasing hospitalization, and there's a slight increase in deaths this week. But those are really very small when you consider how many cases that we have of BA4 and BA5.
Okay, so when we look at the cases of BA4 and BA5, can they, I don't know, recombine, split, whatever it is that they do, recombine, I suppose, and create yet more subvariants of Omicron? And in 2 months' time we go through the same thing, but with a different sort of, what do you call it, a subvariant of a subvariant?
So it all depends, Stephen, on whether you want the hard truth or you want me to sugarcoat it. So let me tell you the hard truth.
Do one first and then the other. Appreciate the warning. Okay, hard truth, go for it.
So the hard truth is that this particular virus has 30,000 base pairs. So in other words, its gene sequence is 30,000 long. Every one of those 30,000 base pairs has 4 alternatives. So it can mutate at the level of 4 to the power 30,000. So that just gives you some idea. It's in the billions. So this virus hasn't even gone into a whole lot of areas where it can mutate. It has focused in one specific area that we have seen most of the mutation. So it has a huge number of possibilities in terms of mutation. The issue is, will those mutations give it an advantage in terms of being able to spread faster and escape immunity? If you just look at what we're seeing, there's a high likelihood that we will see many new variants. That's just based on, basic mathematics, that there are so many possibilities that the virus still has available in terms of mutating, that we are quite likely to see a few more. And if the subvariants are also making a difference, then we've got to worry about new variants, and we've got to worry about the existing variants also mutating. So we've got to worry about both those things. So that just tells us that we have to be ready to work on the basis that there's a likely scenario that we will see more variants still coming, or subvariants still coming. But there has to be a point, in my view anyway, where the virus cannot keep mutating. In other words, it has to reach some point where even if it mutates and will continue to mutate, but it can't create advantage. When it reaches that point, then we will be getting to a point where we have a variant that we're going to have to just live with. So that's what we sometimes refer to, that's the one that's going to become endemic, because it won't be able to create new waves. The current versions are all creating new waves, so they are more epidemic viruses. But when it gets endemic, we'll then get used to it and we'll develop new vaccines. Now, when that point is going to come, we don't yet know, and nobody can guess that point. I'm hoping it will be pretty soon, like in the next few years, and not, take us in the long term. So that's my hope.
You're with SAFM, your mediated conversation, brought to you by the F&B Cash Intelligence Investments. Choosing where to invest your hard-earned money can be complex. With F&B's Cash Intelligence Investment, you can track the daily performance of a portfolio of money market instruments in South African rands. Invest from 1 million rand and choose flexible access to your investment after 32, 45 or 90 days. There's no monthly account fee, and you can reinvest or redirect your interest, add money to your account whenever you like, plus earn eBucks rewards. Open an account now on the FNB app or online banking. T's and earn rules apply. FNB is a division of First Rand Bank Limited, an authorized FSP and credit provider. Professor Salim Abdool Karim with us through until 9 o'clock, talking about COVID-19, Omicron, and of course vaccinations. You know, Professor Abdool Karim is the director at the Center for the AIDS Program of Research in South Africa. Professor, you made the point that vaccines are clearly having an impact. But so is, I think, what we call community transmission, in that we've been exposed to the virus. Is it possible at this stage to assess how much of an impact vaccines are having as opposed to the transmission of the virus, or is it not possible to say at this stage?
It's very hard to tease out the relative contributions of each. But what we do know is that individuals who had natural infection, that the virus is able, the new variants are quite often able to just break through that immunity. But that what happens is that when somebody has had past infection and then they get a vaccine, that makes a huge difference. They develop something we call hybrid immunity. That hybrid immunity is a combination of natural infection and vaccination, and that produces antibodies that are about 100 times higher. So in a way, people who've had natural infection and had vaccination, they are in the pound seats because they have a level of immunity that provides them with the best protection available, even better than having just vaccination, and significantly better. There's a study in the New England Journal of Medicine that shows that individuals who are vaccinated do much better than individuals who have past infection without vaccination. So it looks like all these things contribute. But whatever we are looking at, vaccines tend to produce quite significantly higher antibody levels. For example, 2 doses of Pfizer vaccine produce antibodies that are quite high compared to natural infection. It's comparable to people who had very severe COVID-19. So vaccination tends to provide quite high levels of antibodies. The problem with all of these is that over time, immunity wanes. And immunity wanes, and we don't really understand why, because we make vaccines against a lot of other things, and immunity does wane, but it remains still quite intact. It seems that with SARS-CoV-2, because it's able to evade the very early immune responses, even when we've got memory, it takes a while for that memory to kick in, so people still get infected. So it looks like this virus has evolved in a way that it's able to bypass some of the critical immune elements. But still, what happens is that no matter what variant you're talking about, no matter what vaccine you're talking about, all vaccines against all the variants do very well in preventing severe infection and hospitalization. Well over 80%, 90% protection. So that's the benefit. So even if people are getting infected, they're not getting severe disease.
The vaccines that we have now, do you think that we're still going to be using them in 10 years' time, or are you expecting the vaccines to change, or is it going to depend on if, when, and how we get, billions of mutations of the virus?
Yeah, so I think we will not be using the vaccines we're using now within the next 2 to 3 years. And the reason for that is the vaccine we are using now is based on the ancestral strain. It's based on the original virus that came out of Wuhan. So that's almost all the vaccines we have at the moment are based on that. But we're now seeing that as the virus is mutating, that there are some parts of the virus that are highly conserved. In other words, they don't change. If those parts change, then the virus can't grow. So if those parts change, then the virus is hobbled. or it's like committing suicide for the virus. So because those parts of the virus can't change, we need to develop a new set of vaccines that target those conserved parts of the virus. So there are about 7 or 8 groups that I'm aware of that are doing that, and there are at least 2 of those vaccines in trials right now. So I'm anticipating that within the next 2 years or so, we will be switching to the next generation of vaccines. And those vaccines are likely to be vaccines that protect the conserved parts. So why is that important? Because it's now protecting us against variants that haven't even been created, because any new variant can't change those parts. So we want a vaccine that when a new variant comes along, we're not worried about it, because the vaccine we have will protect us. And so that's what I anticipate to occur over the next few years.
At the moment, we're only vaccinating children when they get to the age of 12. When do you expect that to change?
So the U.S. has been vaccinating children between 5 and 11, and there's a paper published in the Journal of the American Medical Association this week that just provided some new data on the efficacy of the vaccine in the 5 to 11-year-olds in terms of hospitalization, and the results are very good, very promising. So we can anticipate that we should have pretty good data on the 5 to 11-year-olds within the next few months. It all just depends on when Pfizer submits its documentation to our regulator, CAPRISA, for approval. At this point, we have there are trials underway in the very little children. And Moderna published a paper in last week's New England Journal of Medicine showing pretty good antibody responses in the 1 to 5-year-olds. And there they were using a much lower dose of the vaccine because, with the very little ones, you can't give them the same dose as adults. So it's been a big issue to try and find the right dose. They used a dose that was, I think, just less than half. So we'll just wait for that to occur to find the right dose in the very little ones before that occurs. But I would anticipate that within the next few months, we should be starting to vaccinate the 5 to 11-year-olds, and probably by the end of the year, we should have good data to go to the entire population.
We're speaking to Professor Salim Abdool Karim, Director of the Center for the AIDS Program of Research in South Africa. We'll continue conversations around this in a moment. Your Mediated Conversation will continue 9 minutes now to 9 o'clock.
SAFM, guiding you through the rush hour traffic.